Thank you, Barbara. And before I start, I would like to make my personal, give my personal gratitude and thanks to Barbara for being a great director of ACOR, the American Center for Oriental Research. And I'm particularly sad that she will be going. But as the sun sets, the sun will also rise with Dr. Christman. So we look forward to working with him and to continuing the great work of ACOR, the American Center for Oriental Research. I emphasize research, and I will throughout the talk and at the end, because this, I think, was the primary reason for ACOR, the American Center for Oriental Research, and the other centers, such as the German, the British, the French, the Italians, and others, lest I go on, including a few of us Greeks, without an institute. So, I shall begin. Some of you have heard me speak about this topic, generally speaking, from one of my excavations, which I'll be focusing on today. But I'm trying to put it into context and trying to also understand it myself. I'm hoping that this will also be a chapter in my book on the project with the support of the American Center of Oriental Research. And it begins with really Arabia, Roman Arabia, and with this not very big book, but seminal book on Roman Arabia. For those of you who haven't read it, I think it's essential for all, not only libraries, but people who live in Jordan or in the Arab world, to understand this topic. Professor Bowersock is probably the most eminent professor of this period, and he has a number of publications which really are extremely important. What I show here, what's shown here, is this map of the greatest extent of the Nabataean world. And here I have to thank the French archaeologists, Professor Villeneuve and Leila Nehme, who've made this map, with also the help of some others here, Thibault, who have helped add some sites to the Nabataean world. But this is the greatest extent of the Nabataean world. And for those of you who are not familiar, very familiar with the Nabataean world, the extent of it was from Damascus all the way to what is now Madain Saleh or Hijra in Saudi Arabia, and including the Sinai. So quite a large area that we're talking about. This is the greatest extent. Throughout the history, of course, it's had smaller areas, but this is the greatest extent. So again, in the Roman province of Arabia, it encompasses this so-called Nabataean kingdom. Oh, no, that was... So, as I just mentioned, we have evidence, well, we have the evidence of the expanse of this great Nabataean Arab kingdom all the way to the southern point of Arabia. And what we have here is a very important, very important inscription here, which is bilingual in Nabataean and Sabaean, which is the language of South Yemen and South Arabia. So a very important inscription dated to the year of, the time of Aretas IV, Nabataean king, 9 BC to 40 AD. Very important that we have this inscription showing the context all the way throughout Arabia. There's also fragments of pottery which were found in this most southerly point of Arabia, both in the site of Marib in Yemen, and also Khorori in Amman, which is on the coastal areas of Oman, and was primarily involved in the trade of frankincense. So obviously frankincense was one of the most important, if not the most important, product of trade in Arabia. Believe it or not, well, there's two reasons I've put this up here, or maybe three. One, as far as I know, and there are people here who definitely know more than I do, the first exhibition on Jordan was only in 1970, which highlights the point of how young our studies are about the Nabataean world and indeed Jordan itself. So correct me maybe later if I'm wrong, but the first exhibition was on the Nabataeans in Germany, and this is the catalog. And you notice the name of the title of the exhibition in German, but translated in English, the Nabataeans, a forgotten people at the Dead Sea. So in 1970, which is not so long ago, still the concept in Europe, or the people who were studying the Arab world, or this part of the world, saw that relatively near the Dead Sea. So it was in relation to the Dead Sea. So I thought this was important, especially for my talk this evening, where I'm focusing much more on the Dead Sea. But in the 1970s, when even the word Nabataean was not really known, the relation to the Dead Sea was the way that they could identify with this virtually unknown people. And I think, this exhibition catalog makes the point. The other cover book I have here, and I'm not advertising a book that I've edited, was the first conference on the Nabataeans, the world of Nabataeans, which was held in the British Museum in 2001. Since then, there have been conferences, and there's been a lot more on the Nabataean people, but still, as far as I know, and again, correct me, there may be people here who know more than I do, I think 2001, this was the first international conference on the Nabataeans. And it includes many of the best-known scholars of the day in this edited volume. So the point I'm making with these two books and the exhibitions and conference is that it's very relatively new what we know about the Nabataeans, who they were, and not just here in Jordan, us, you, but especially abroad in Europe, America, or anywhere else. It's still very unknown. People know Petra. The Nabataeans is still something like what? So now I will focus on the Dead Sea as much as I can. I'm sure you all know the shape of the Dead Sea here, what it looks like pretty much today as the levels are dropping. But historically, all around the coasts, the shores of the Dead Sea, which is the title of this topic, are a number of archaeological sites. Today, they mostly go back to pretty much the Hellenistic Roman period. Prehistoric sites are farther up, because the Dead Sea was much higher up, but I won't be talking about that this evening. But depending on the level of the Dead Sea, you have occupations along the Dead Sea, and for this topic today, it will focus on about 2,000 years ago, which is more or less the shape of the Dead Sea today, west and east. And I will be focusing, of course, mostly on the sites that I've been working on, or we've been working on with the Department of Antiquities, on the southeastern edge, which is the majority of the number of the Nabataean sites. Before that, why the Dead Sea, and why was there an interest in the Dead Sea, even from the Bronze and Iron Ages? There was an interest in the Dead Sea because of its unique resources, particularly salt and asphalt, which is tar, bitumen, in Arabic, zifte. Is that right? Now, salt is a very important product. In fact, the Romans paid their soldiers a proportion of their salaries, salarium, in salt, so showing the significance. And the Dead Sea was one of the major sources of salt. And bitumen, salt, right, a food additive, and a preservative, very good for salting fish, salting all kinds of meats, and it would keep for a long time. This is a photograph. By the way, most of the photographs are my photographs. I indicate whether or not, but they're mostly mine. This is in the southern part of the Dead Sea, local women carrying salt. Even though this is technically illegal, they still practice it today. And the salt that you can collect today needs processing, but what they collect it for is for animals. And here in Petra, not very far from the center, some years ago, I saw these bags of salt, and I asked the local Bedouins, and they said, we bring them up from the Hor, from the Dead Sea. And these are the bags of salt that they are collecting to give to their animals. It's a basic requirement. Of course, today we're all looking for low saline sodium diets, but in those days it was important. And of course, this detail on the Madaba map, showing a boat on the Dead Sea and a pile of white something being transported. I would think it's probably salt, considering it's so important of a product. Asphalt, I mentioned already, is bitumen. You get large pieces. This is a piece that's on exhibition at the Potash Company in Jordan. It's very good for lining the insides of your boats to make it waterproof. Also, a lot of pottery we find, even in the Bronze and Iron Ages. We have bitumen in as a waterproofing the pottery. I think it's also been used in the Ain Gazelle statues for the eyes. Isn't that correct? So there's a need for bitumen. And I think it's also been used in the mummification process. So the Egyptians were particularly interested in this source of bitumen. There's another resource which is not very well known, but it's prevalent throughout the Dead Sea, and that's sulfur. And this is a nodule of sulfur encased in gypsum salts, which you can find. And I'm sure actually, I can't prove it, but this is what in biblical times they called brimstone, fire and brimstone, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. So these exist, but it was used historically for fumigation, medicine, and bleaching cloth. So it had it was useful in antiquity and an important resource also in the Dead Sea. Another product of the Dead Sea that was very sought after was balsam oils. Sometimes people use this term very loosely. They say balsam oils. Even in places today like Greece, they have balsamelo, and it was produced 2,000 years ago. Particularly, it was famous in the site of Ain Jidy, but I prefer to use the Arabic spelling, Ain Jidy. And there is a source which mentions that sometimes it was mixed. This is on the western side of the Dead Sea. Sometimes it was mixed with a variety of Hypericum, which is here, and used as this kind of ointment, which was supposed to be healthy to put in your skin, and sometimes added for perfume reasons. So today, in English, it's called St. John's wort, but it's still used today in some countries. And if you're wondering where it was contained, very often we find these vessels, glass or pottery vessels, the ungumterium, which I think may have been used for this as vessels to contain this balsam oil. It was a secret. The process was a secret, and from the sources, it was the Jews of Ain Jidy and the Nabataeans who knew the secret to produce this valuable oil. Now, in the south of Jordan, where I work, there is a site which it's a possibility. We don't have any real scientific evidence, but it's the type of structures that the type of location within this valley where they could also have produced balsam oil. And this is within the Nabataean world, not exactly on the coast. And this is, this is the site of Baleda. And as you can see here, quite a strong kind of fortified farmstead. Our excavation house was nearby, so we used to go there often. And one day we saw also an incense altar nearby, recorded it, and unfortunately the next day it was gone. Anyway, there is a possibility that it was this balsam production also on the eastern Jordanian side. So we've talked about some products. We've talked about the importance of the Dead Sea and the Nabataeans in general, how they traded with the south of Arabia, but where were they selling to and how were they getting things there? Well, primarily over land. So we have pack animals, which is an interesting part of some of the research we're doing because we're looking at animal bones, and some animals are not used just for eating, just for their meat and milk. Some animals are specifically, such as camel, but also there's a cattle from India which is called zebu. Yeah, zebu. I think it's the zebu. Yes, thank you. Yes. So some of these animals are used for pack animals or agricultural reasons, and that's one study which archaeologists can look at from the animal bones. So the southeastern part or the southern part of Jordan and the Negev, you see these are all the various roads and road networks that have been recorded through historical sources and archaeological sources, archaeological surveys, which primarily will lead to two major export points, Aqaba in the south, but more important, Gaza, which would then export the products to the Greco-Roman world, and which is where most of the money, particularly for frankincense, went to. Gaza was the great port of antiquity, of the Roman period, Roman-Byzantine period, And I think, you know, there are mostly camel caravans. In our specific survey around the southern end of the Dead Sea, we walked up and down and found three main roads. One to the north, Wadi Kunyeh, one Wadi Sarmuj in the center, and then the so-called Nakab Abrash. This is the southern end of the Dead Sea, looking across to the Negev and Gaza, and this is the as-Safi. And you'll see some of the roads that we identified. This is one, the Nakab, and the day that we were there, there were even some animals, so proof that they still use it today. And the Bedouins have also drawn a little camel here. So this was wide enough to be a pass going south towards Tafila. So that was one route up from the valley and across to... The other one was farther north, the Wadi Kunyeh, which I visited some years ago with one of my closest colleagues, if not the closest colleague, Robert Schick. And you see here the paved road of the and stepped road of the Roman period. This would have been used during the Nabataean period and Roman Nabataean period and later periods, and it leads all the way down to the valley. Perhaps the most impressive is the central one and the largest one, which is the Wadi Sarmuj, which geologists know because of its very important geological features. But as you can see here, look at the very distinct road going all the way down from Taiba village in the Karak Plateau all the way down to the as-Safi. This was probably the largest and most important road, and you can see the width of it here with some archaeologists standing here. And you can see the well-built structure it was. So the road network, obviously, we've picked out these three roads, but there are many other roads going east, west, and south, north-south. Boat, of course. I've already showed you a photograph of a boat on the Dead Sea, this one here, with possibly salt being taken up from the Dead Sea up north. There's a modern parallel. There was the family Deeb in the early 20th century had a concession for selling salt to Jerusalem, and there were boats that would take it up to the north. And I actually have a photograph of it. If you visit our museum in the as-Safi, you'll see the photograph, at least of this boat, even though it hasn't survived, where they would take salt up. So we have a modern parallel to salt being transported. The other boat people have thought could be wheat, but the point is that there's sea transport, Dead Sea transport across the Dead Sea, and there are ports that we know of, first at Kaliroy or ez-Zara, located just here where there are hot springs, and there's also a couple on the western side. Before I go and show you those sites, one of the many tombstones that were found, early Christian tombstones that were found in the as-Safi, one actually depicts a boat. You see, very similar to this with the oars. So it's nice to have that also depicted on a stone, on a tombstone. This is on display in the as-Safi Museum in I say as-Safi Museum because the lowest place on earth is a very long name. But more about that later. This is one of the known excavated sites where there's a port on the west, and it's very interesting here because this was a dry dock actually, so the boats would have been taken up, and then the camel caravan would have taken them on to Gaza or whatever. It's very important evidence like this because you can't keep boats on the Dead Sea. With maybe even overnight, the salts will collect on the boat and really make it heavy and destroy it, and it'll sink. So any of this boat transport would have to be taken, the boats would have to be taken out of the sea daily. If you're driving along the Dead Sea today, there is, believe it or not, a Jordanian Navy on the Dead Sea, and they have patrol boats which go out in the evening, but they always come back and they always take them out and they're on land. So this is Roman period evidence, actually it's a little bit earlier, it's Hellenistic Roman period evidence of where the Nabataean goods or the transport would have arrived to. From this site we also have wheat. There is also evidence of an anchor, you see here, which was found, and a cache of coins which helped give us the date 1st century BC. On the Jordanian side, the Wadi Mujib has, thanks to the late archaeologist Dr. Taysir Atiyat, who did a survey along the Wadi Mujib, very difficult here. He identified, I think, at least 3 Nabataean sites. one which he called a temple. Nearby, there's also a watchtower, a Rujum Manara, and this is all located just to the south of the Wadi Mujib. Important because the Wadi Mujib was supposed to be the border between the Nabataeans and the Herodian kingdoms. So the fact that there's watchtower and this temple is interesting. Also, as Taisir Atiyat mentions in his publication, it could have been the traders, the Nabataean traders, that would have stopped here and wanted to pray at their temple. So there was a Nabataean presence here just at the border of Herodian and Nabataean kingdoms. Within the Herodian kingdom, there is another harbor. This is in Jordan, a very long harbor with rooms, probably for shops, similar to Ain Jidy. In fact, this site is very similar to Ain Jidy, and the German Archaeological Institute here worked on it with the late Professor Strobel. I spent a couple of weeks there with him also. It's a very interesting site, and it's very interesting that I call it the Department of Antiquities, whoever's here. It could easily be not even developed for tourism, a couple of signs, because the site is basically exposed. It was excavated by the department, and it's very interesting to show this trading context across the Dead Sea. And it's located right by the side of the road. So I always thought this would be a really easy, and considering there are hotels up the road, about 10 minutes away, really easy site. Farther up, there's another important site. This photo by Jane Taylor, which most of you recognize. It's fantastically timing to get up in the helicopter just as the sun was hitting Makaur or Macheres. This is just uphill from Ain Zara. There is an ancient road which connects it. Very important kind of border fortress, not just a palace for Herod, but it really was part of the bordering defense. Okay. Reconstruction here, which is in the book by our Hungarian colleague Voresh, who's reconstructed with this not just palace, but also settlement around Macheres. And, not surprising, there was Nabataean pottery found during the excavations. So obviously they're having contact with the Nabataean world. But just to divert a little bit to history, there's a very important history here, which again connects the Nabataeans, not just a bit of pottery. We talk about, Herod, and sometimes it's confusing, and because there were many Herods, but the Herod we're talking about is Antipas, Herod Antipater, who's on the right here. This is a modern reconstruction, not a very pleasant person. He was the one. He was the son of Herod the Great, and was the one married to Phaisalius, who's over here on one of the coins. And it's labeled in Aramaic, and he was the one who was involved in the episodes of the beheading of John the Baptist. But what's interesting here is that Phaisalius was the daughter of King Aretas IV, so she was a Nabataean, and his offspring would have been Nabataeans. In fact, there's not just one historical contact between the Nabataeans and the Herodians. There was also quite a romantic relationship, and that's putting it diplomatically, between a very famous Nabataean vizier, Stylios, depicted here, and Salome I, the sister of Herod the Great, not Herod Antipater, Herod the Great. And here she is depicted, and this was a marriage. This was not a marriage; it was an affair. But it shows very much the close relationship, really, that the Nabataeans and Herodians had through blood and through relations. Below, I have probably the earliest depiction of the beheading of St. John the Baptist in a book, in a codex from the 6th century AD, which is showing the beheading of John the Baptist. The reason I chose this is, first of all, it's the oldest one I know, but also all the other depictions show them standing or, I don't know, in chairs. And this is the proper way of Roman and Nabataean sitting. It was basically lying down. Right. I won't give much detail about this, but showing you the complicated ancestry of Herod the Great, who had an Idumean father and Antipater, named Antipater, who we just mentioned, and a Nabataean mother, Cypros, who was actually a Nabataean. And this is the kind of family tree. And here we have Cypros and Herod and the complicated inter-family relationships which they had. So the Herods and the Nabataeans had close relations, family, and they were fairly, close. Now, many of you know me in the past for Dura Europus, the sanctuary or cave of Saint Lot. And you say, oh no, he's going to start telling us about Lot and the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. No, this site here, by the spring of Ain Abata, had, we found sherds, pottery sherds from the Nabataean period. It's located just here. And when we excavated up in Lot's sanctuary of Lot, we found more Nabataean evidence. And here it is. This is some of the pottery that came from the spring and inside at the depth of the cave before the Byzantine period. I don't mean to make it sound really simple, but for those of you who are not archaeologists, nothing to do with this structure, but down below it, before the Christians, whoever they were, built the church, there was Nabataean, very fine Hellenistic and Nabataean pottery, including a Megarian bowl coming from Greece, Megaria. And perhaps more important is this calcite vessel which comes from Yemen, from South Yemen. So this is the type of container that they would have frankincense. And the connections here are both with the Greek world, the Roman Mediterranean world, and Arabia. And of course, the typical Nabataean pottery. I had to stick this in, one mosaic from the church, which is dated to the Umayyad period, 691, but look at the way that the mosaicist has depicted the kind of branches of and leaves here. It looks so much like the Nabataean pottery, particularly this type 38 of Schmidt-Korte. So I thought there is some influence here that's continuing into the Christian period from the Nabataean period. Now, to focus on Khirbet Qazone, or how to spell it or how to pronounce it, and I'm very happy that Lucine is here today because she's helped me work out how this name came about. I've misspelled it, I know, and now it's in the publications. But from what I understand from Lucine, it was an Armenian from CAORC, or a refugee actually, that came from what is now Turkey, and his name was Hagason, and the locals were calling it Khirbet Qazone. I spelled it this way, the department is spelling it a different way, the Armenians spelled it a different way. I'll put all three spellings in the book and we'll all be happy. But the point is that the locals were talking about this site, and as we were driving past here every day to go to Dura Europus, Lot Sanctuary, one day we saw the bulldozers cutting the side of the road, and we stopped, and this area here, 1992, clean, nothing but the agriculture farm of Mr. Hagason in 1992, not so long ago. If you go a little bit farther back to the old British Mandate roads, again, there's nothing here. There's a number of sites that still exist today, including Haditha, Mazra, the Tawahin Sukkar, but nothing here indicating any archaeological sites. So we stopped, we took some samples, we looked at this. This is in 1996, where we just stopped and we saw this landscape pitted. Only within a few years, it was 1992, within 4 years, the tomb robbers had found it and started digging and pillaging. And you can see here by 1999, this is the area which we saw earlier. There were literally, we counted about 3,500 robbed out tombs. So then it decided we had to mount a rescue project to see what was happening there. We took a few fragments of textile, sent it to the British Museum, to world-class renowned textile expert Kira Granger-Taylor, and looked at some of the pottery, and it all turned out to be 1st, 2nd century AD. Before that, just to tell you how the tomb robbers work, because we always talk about tomb robbing, there's a fantastic tool here which the tomb robbers used. and they poke holes, 1, 2, 3, until they find a soft bit where they had put the tomb in. And then they dig. I was desperately looking for the watercolor of the 19th century where the Italians were using this to do tomb robbing in southern Italy. Same kind of tool. I don't know how they got it, but the same kind of tool. You press down, so techniques of tomb robbing. And these are the tools, which we confiscated and used for our excavation. We did. They were very, very good tools. Now, whoops. Now, before I say a little bit more, focus on the excavation of the site, of course, it was sponsored by the Department of Antiquities, along with our Hellenic Society for Near East Studies. The excavation and the survey work initially was supported, firstly, indirectly, from the British Museum, from my project, and then we received some funds from the British Museum. In 2004, the British Academy and even National Geographic came on board, and always with the support of the local company, Aramix, who've always supported me in Jordan, and I'm in debt to them for the 35 years I've been working here. Then conservation was done also, as I'll show you, by the British Museum, primarily on the textiles, but also by the technological school in Greece, which is now a University of Western Athens, and they've continued conserving some of the textiles. But most importantly, and the reason I'm here today, is to highlight the fact that ACOR has now come out and supported our research and our studies, which will be published about this site. So again, very important to have a number of institutions digging, but also to have this kind of an institution, ACOR, to support research and excavations. So we dealt with here, with the Department of Antiquities, trying to make a few excavations as much as we could, and we dug about 50 tombs out of these thousands. And we did a very detailed contour map. This was actually specifically paid for by the British Academy, so we should give credit to them. And now we know exactly the land of Mr. Haigasson, which is, by the way, still his property. But this is the extent of the cemetery of so-called Khirbet Qazone. And just a few shots of our excavations. Two types of tombs. One are very shallow graves with slabs. And as you can see, it's right across the street, right across from the police station. No further comment. And the very deep shafts, the Arcosolia deep shafts, which are over 2 meters deep. And this is what those tomb robbers were trying to find, the soft bits where the Nabataeans had dug these tombs, but very deep. And for that reason, many of them, some of them survived. And we were lucky enough to have a good sample of them. This is what the section looks like of the deep Arcosolia. It's almost 2 meters. So a very typical kind of tomb of the period, as far as the depth of the Roman period. But what was characteristic was that they were sealed with mud bricks, or adobe, as I like to say, sealed. So there was no air getting in, most of them, and very salty, because it's by the Dead Sea, very salty conditions of the soil. So when we opened them, we were surprised, well, not totally, because we'd already found some textiles on the surface, but we had complete clothes that wrapped the bodies. And this is one of the really important things about this site. So this is our again, another publication, our typical tombs. And immediately when people started to, some academics, archaeologists came to see it, they said, it's like Qumran. Qumran, famous for the Dead Sea Scroll sites, on the western side, had this very characteristic tombs which were sealed again. There's also been another site, Beit Shafaf, near Jerusalem, which has similar ones. Soon you'll see more that have come up in Jordan. So very characteristic. There's also another site, tell us idea, which we've come up, or the excavators have come up with a similar kind of tomb, which has a sealed, kind of a brick sealed tomb structures. And I show this photograph because it's very colorful, but Jack was very kind to show me his research on this period, where he's saying, and he's got better images, but they weren't as colorful. Sorry, Jack. But in the publication, we'll definitely use your work because he's dating them, I think, to the late Persian period? I don't see where he is, Jack, but anyway. It's important that it's possible that this type of tomb may have gone to, it might be pre-Roman Hellenistic. It might be something that is from the Persian period or Iron Age. But that's still ongoing research, and I hope Jack will help me with that. What did we find, though, is lots of Nabataean pottery, nice pots, mostly bowls for drinking, bowls for containing food, probably, drinking vessels. I note this, mostly bowls and drinking vessels, and some jewelry in the tombs, not much, some. One stray coin which helped us date it. They're all dated to the 1st and 2nd century. And here the Nabataean pottery. The date from the jewelry, the coins, the pottery is pretty much within this let's say late Roman, late Nabataean period. We also had some other strange things. We had the circular structure, which is, well, hole, basically. Very well kind of made hole with plaster, hearth or some kind of a cup hole. And I'm now comparing it to the recent excavations of Tom Parker and Parker and Perry, who have excavated below the Ridge Church. And here I can plug the new publication of ACOR, which is about to be, should I? Yeah, I think it's just been edited, and I think under your directorship it's going to come out. So you'll have the Ridge Church publication. They dug afterwards some burials below this area and came up with similar kind of holes, which they've also said could be for the funerary meals. So we've got it in our site. They've got it in Petra at the Ridge Church, well, below the Ridge Church. So a nice parallel there. But we also have some tombstones with Nefesh signs. These are all from Qazone here, very slight, and also some what could be betil marker, betils on bricks. Now, there's good parallels with Khirbet Daria, French excavated Khirbet Daria, which has similar kind of Nefesh signs, but also there's also in Petra. I think you can see the ones on here, same kind of funerary Nefesh signs. So again, another Nabataean element. We also have some texts. There's one of the tombstones here had Afsani, which is the interpretation is that it's an Aramaic name. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but Wisaf, gift, a gift, and that's written in Greek, but actually it's an Aramaic name. There's two other papyrus fragments that also written in Greek, but mention a petition in Bosra, and again mention Nabataean names, so Semitic Nabataean names. And now on to the actual burials. You see some of the burials, you saw one that had a textile around it. This one has this is leather, if you can see, and all these lines here are actually, here's a detail of it here, are kind of decorated leather. So the leather was decorated, and we have some evidence for paint. Now, I didn't have any budget left for scientific analysis. The material is with the Department of Antiquities in the as-Safi. One could do more work on leather, not burnt, but desiccated dry leather. So it's decorated and it's painted leather. For a good parallel, here again you have more of this. You see the stitching on the leather bag? They're basically like body bags, as I said in the previous one. And here's more stitching. And that's from Khirbet Qazone. The French excavations at Madain Saleh in modern Saudi Arabia have come up with similar textile leather bags, and they've done this lovely reconstruction, thanks to Leila Nechme, I'm showing it, where they had this leather bags strapped, and that's why you get this kind of lines across the leather bags. And it could be a parallel to what the mummies look like in Fayoum in Egypt now, even though this is not leather, this is textile, but it's the same kind of wrapping for the bodies. And here there's another very nice reconstruction of how they would be carrying the dead person to the burial site. There's also another type of, we only found two like this. They're actually limestone sarcophagus. Unfortunately, this was robbed and it's broken, but we have the fragments of it. And this was another type of burial, but only two existed from the site of Qazone. And of course, we have very well preserved organic material. I mentioned the textiles. These are two textiles wrapped around the bodies. This is kind of a reconstruction of what it would have been like, and we even have the kind of belt tied around the body. So we have textiles and bodies very well preserved. Now, some of the other things that we found in the site. I showed you this photograph earlier of the leather bag, the body bag. Next to it, there was a long object. It was actually a wooden staff. And here's the fragments once we lifted it, because it, it crumbled, but we have that. And it's very interesting because we have the staff in classical Greek times. You have it in classical 5th century BC, 4th century BC pottery. Here you have a Greek depiction of a man with a staff. It was a basic thing. You get it today too, of course, in Bedouins or people walking the mountains. But more interesting is that we have it in Petra, the famous kind of relief that was uncovered not too many years ago. The man is holding a staff, and behind him is the camel caravan. So the staff in Greece, in Nabataean Petra, and in the tombs was something that was part of their equipment, their accoutrements. Also leather sandals. And here we have fragments of leather sandals, which we found, and it's a typical kind of Roman. We didn't find this. This is a depiction. But that's the typical kind of sandals that one would wear, and there are sandals. But perhaps more interesting, and this is something I got very excited about a week ago, is we had these leaves around the bands of one of the heads, the temporal part and the forehead, and it was around one of the bodies. Well, this is known in classical, again, Greek times as the wreath was a sign of the victor. Here there's a depiction again in a Greek pot, the Olympic victor. But also you get it in the mummy portraits in Fayum. This is one, I was trying to think of which one of the many would I portrayed, but I thought this was a very pretty girl. So I put this one up showing you the wreath that she had. And in Egypt it was something very important. It was a crown of justification in ancient Egypt. And it was basically, it shows that, you are dead, but you are triumphal in your death, over death. So both in ancient Egypt and Greece, we had this wreath, this laurel wreath, a symbol of spirituality and perhaps even of physical cleansing abilities. Now, you say, okay, fine, you've got it in a burial and you've got it in Greece and Egypt, but we also have it in the coins. We have it in the coins of, here's a coin of Aretas IV in Shakilat, where we have this laurel wreath on the coins. This is interpreted as an Isis Basileon wreath, but we have it in Nabataean king's coin. And we have it in Ezantur, in the excavations. It doesn't show it very clear. I was trying yesterday to get a clear picture. But even on one of these stone idols, which is supposed to be al-Uzza, or Isis, again connecting it with Egypt, the religious connection with Egypt, we have this wreath. Now, for any of you who don't believe me, next time you're in Petra, go to the museum and have a good look at this. But there definitely is a wreath over the head of this this stone idol. We found also what was wool pressed together, a felt cap, what's called felt. So we had the felt and straps from the excavations from one tomb, and it seems to be similar to this, again, famous sculpture in Petra, where he's wearing a kind of a hat. There's different interpretations. It could be he's a priest, it could be just a kind of style. But we also have it at Dura Europus, on one of the wall paintings. We have a depiction of Aaron, the prophet Aaron, wearing the same kind of a cap with straps. So in these barrels, we have yet another thing. And then, of course, now the textiles, which are perhaps the most exciting. They're comparable to Greco-Roman clothes, found in Fayum in Egypt, Masada, Cave of Letters, and even Palmyra in Syria. Very typical dress of the times. We would have all been dressed in these, male and female, having different styles, but they're basically the tunics with the double clavi. The clavi means these lines. Your head would have gone here. It's like a poncho. And then the typical mantle, which is, again, a very typical cloak mantle of the Greek world. But they would have these little, what they call gamma designs. The Greek gamma is a G. And it's basically these little corners. And that would have helped you to know where to place them on the body. So we have these on the textiles. and it can help us date them. Aside from that, the textile experts are also able to work out the weave pattern, the weaving, and thread, and all this, but don't ask me why, because I'm not an expert on that. This is what we have in there's a poster, which is an information poster at the museum at the lowest place on earth in the as-Safi. This is the information poster we have showing you a highlight of both the excavated and textiles from Khirbet Qazone, how they are in design, the details, the gamma, and the various kind of details that you see on depictions, and the weave patterns of the threading, the spinning and weaving, which is beyond my expertise. And we have about 60 of them, complete or semi-complete ones from Khirbet Qazone. This is actually the biggest collection, not only in Jordan. Outside of Egypt, I don't think we have a bigger collection. Jordan should be very proud and happy with this collection, which we found by accident. And I'm very happy that some of these are now on display, as you'll see. Very important collection. This lady here, by the way, this is a Fayum portrait. And you see the clavish she's wearing? It's exactly what we have from Khirbet Qazone, one of these. This is the last piece that's being conserved, but well, for the moment at least. But it's exactly what you find in the Fayum portraits in Egypt. And you have it here, we have it here in Egypt, in Jordan, sorry. No, so when we by 2004, it hit the press. And beginning from, of course, the great Rami Khouri, the former editor of the Jordan Times, who wrote actually the first article of the salvage excavations, and in the French, Le Monde de la Bible and other magazines picked up on the story, including one on here which says, "Who lies here? Who are these people?" It was a problem for some people interpreting the section of the Qumran burials, because they associated them with the Jewish Essene sect. And that's why it's very important for me, for us, to highlight the importance of these sites at Qazone and now other sites as being Nabataean. They are not Jewish, because in the beginning, this is what some people were saying. There's certainly nothing alluding to that. So, but we do have this very important Babatha Archive found in the Cave of Letters. Here is a section of, well, kind of a map of where they were found. And the Babatha letters, one of these letters is a lady, Babatha, who left her will, and she mentions that she had property in a place called Mahoza and Mazra in the area of Zoara, which is the as-Safi. And it's dated again, the same period as Khirbet Qazone. So now becomes the kind of more research. We have to find this, or identify the site. The Bay of Haditha, which is just by Mazra, for any of you who know the southern Ghors, the Lisan, is, in my opinion, not only the best candidate, but probably the place. Aerial view showing you the relatively rich agricultural areas in the south end of the Dead Sea. And in our recent work, we even came up with a stone with a hole in it. It's still on the site. I didn't collect it. The department wants to collect it. It could be one of these anchors. That was just this brief visit I made a couple of months ago. But there is increasing evidence that it could be the sites of Mahoza and Mazra mentioned in these Babatha archives. This is the site of Haditha before they built lots of buildings. There was an Ottoman fort here, which is now gone, and there was Roman Nabataean pottery here, and there were also tombs of Haditha behind, which 2 late Roman plates were found. One is now in the Safi Museum, the other one is at Yarmouk. There's a soldier's helmet, which was also found, which is now in the Jordan Museum. And the Department of Antiquities did rescue excavations and found a Roman hypocaust bath system. And there's very little left of the site, but there's enough to show that there was a major site here. And here's Haditha, and it was very near to the best place for boats to come to port. So I'm proposing that it was the port on the Dead Sea, the southern port. The later part of the Khirbet Qazone site seemed to have a different period. It was different tombs made with stones, as you can see here, a few beads, and one of these beads actually has a little cross on it. So it seems to be that, and there was pottery also from the earlier 4th century period, the later 4th century period, and we came up with a number of stones, this time with crosses palm leaves with Alpha Omega, which symbolizes Jesus Christ. Another cross here. And they look just like the ones, again, found at Khirbet Daria here. Very simple crosses. So I believe these are some of the earliest kind of Christian evidence in the area. And the point here is that if there was a continuity of these people living there in the same cemetery, they were Nabataeans, they became Christian now. The Department of Antiquities did another rescue excavation in 2015 and came up with this lovely church with a nice mosaic. And this is right across the street from this cemetery. So I think there's a relation there. In fact, the excavator of the department is calling it the Church of Qazone because it's just there. It's actually in Mazra, but it's so close by that it's probably related to that. So we have the tombstones, we have that mosaic, and then we have this. I'm just showing you a map of, how early Christian Byzantine period, how this area, where this area belonged. It belonged in Zoara. Here's the south end of the Dead Sea. So it was very much in an area which was part of the of Palestine, yes, of the Byzantine Christian period. So it fits in quite well historically with other sites, including Petra and Udru and Ayla and etc. and Feinan, of course. The British Museum took up a major conservation project first, with beginning in 1999, and as you can see here Granger Taylor is inspecting some of the textiles that were taken to the British Museum, with the permission, of course, of the Department of Antiquities. They were taken, and here the conservators were analyzing and studying and conserving as many of the textiles as they could. Before this happened, I had to give a presentation on Khirbet Qazone, just like I'm doing today, to the trustees of the British Museum. And as you can see here, one of the people that I was very honored to have spoken to and asked questions about Khirbet Qazone was this British Museum trustee, which I don't know how many of you can recognize, that it's Sir David Attenborough. So even he knows about the site. And here is the result of the best pieces, the 12 best pieces, which were now conserved and mounted in the British Museum. There's the storage of them, as you can see here. This is what it's like now today. Very similar storage we have now in Safi in Jordan. And the agreement was between the Prime Minister of Jordan and the British Museum was that 6 would be kept there and 6 are returned. So nothing to do with me, but it's good that some things are also there. And it's very good that they're here in Jordan and on display, as you'll see. Now, before I show you the display, I'm getting to the end. Just to highlight Zoara itself, in the Babatha Archives, which I've mentioned, Zoara is mentioned there, Zoara. So it talks about Zoara and Mahoza and Mazra being the port. And here is the bottom end of the Dead Sea. You can see Zoara being depicted, and more or less somewhere here would be the port of Zoara, which is, I think, Mahoza. There's a view of Jane Taylor's photograph again of Zoara, which is going to be on the cover of the book, which should have been out now for me to show you, but it's not published yet. But this is the Zoara or as-Safi. Some of the bits and pieces, I'm going to go through this as quickly as I can. There's a continuity of Nabataean architecture styles. I've already mentioned to you some things. These are some of the pieces that we found during our excavations in the as-Safi. These dog-tooth designs, diagonal chiseling perhaps, and even the horn capitals, which we found, one at Dera Nabata and one, thanks to Thibault, has reconstructed very, very recently, another horn capital. So we have this continuity of architectural pieces in the early Christian period, Byzantine. There are also a number of other tombstones that were found in the as-Safi, which are primarily, well, Greek, inscribed in Greek and Christian, as you can see the crosses. But the names, Nabataean names, are preserved here. That's well into the 6th century. So the point I'm making, the people are the same. Now they're using Greek like we're speaking English, and they've become Christian, and later they'll become Muslim. But the point is, at that point, the Nabataeans were still using names like Dusarios, very important Nabataean names. And these are on these tombstones. Obodinaos, Sosana, Obodinaos. These are tombstones from the early Christian period with these clearly Nabataean names, not just Semitic, but Nabataean. We also have Semitic names and Greek names and Latin names, but the fact that there are so many ones that are actually purely Nabataean is important, and it shows the continuity in the area in Jordan. And of course, the papyri from Petra Papyri also mention, and this is the same period as the one in the Lower Safi, also mention Nabataean names such as Obodinaos and Dusarios. In fact, this is one of the more famous ones, if not the most famous ones, of the Theodoros family, which has Obodinaos in it, and again, a very important name. Here is the Obodinaos, son of Obodinaos, papyri. This is actually still here in ACOR, so you can come and see it one day. Very important collection also, but showing you written in Greek, but Nabataeans continuing. Getting near the end, this is the southern Lower Safi area, and here there's also above it there's a large fort which is mentioned in historical texts as the fortress of Zoara. That's this very large fortress called Tawabin. Below Tawabin, there is what I think is an evidence of a dam, and it's here's the water channels which are down from the Wadi al-Hasa, the second biggest wadi of Jordan, going east and west, or from east to west. And just at this point here, there is a niche. Maybe there was a betil, but there is a Nabataean inscription, which is very difficult to read, and we haven't translated it, but it's Nabataean, we think. And there it is being shown by one of the local people. So the dam is probably to do originally Nabataean. And this is the fortress of Zoara. Again, there's large wall around it. Below it are circular, what I think have been called tent encampments, which is why in Arabic they call it the Tawabin, the mother of ovens, bread ovens. Tawabin means bread ovens. But we still are not sure, even after our excavations, if they were tent encampments. So Zoara, and this fortress was mentioned in the important Notitia Dignitatum, a late Roman period text, shows Zoara here, and it was mentioned as having a cavalry unit. During our excavations, we happened to find a little foot which was belonging to a hoof foot, which I thought was very interesting. We didn't find this. This is actually in the Louvre in Paris, but it's just like it. So I thought, is this evidence of a cavalry unit? Anyway, that's playing around a bit. But we did, as you can see here, investigate as much as possible through over 2 seasons, the various trenches to work out the dating of this. And it's pretty much Nabataean pottery and everywhere. We found one fragment of an incense burner with Nabataean script as the name of the person. I forgot the name. But clearly a Nabataean fortress. Also, we found a fragment like this, which I thought was very interesting. It's just a fragment of something, right? But I'm pretty sure it's the wing. Here, one from Khirbet Tanur, a wing. Here, one from Petra itself. And even from Madain Salah, you get the wings. So, a heraldic eagle, very important for the Nabataeans. It was an important religious symbol. And it may have kind of been identified with Dushara. But the fact is that, again, another piece of evidence that it's a Nabataean site. More tombstones. These tombstones coming from the same area mention a standard bearer of Draconarius. Standard bearer is the one who's holding the standard, the flag. And Stratiotis, which is the soldier. So we have military people at Zoara, alluding to this period. And then some of the other very work that's we've picked out recently, Rujum Sheikh Saleh near Numera. This has now been excavated also by the Department of Antiquities, and it's a very clear small fort. But there were tombs next door to it which look very similar to some of the tombs we excavated, so probably Nabataean, Roman Nabataean. Another site which we came across by accident, Ard Ramlet Galab. This is now published, but it wasn't known. It's right there. It's private property, unfortunately. We were able to collect some pottery and some things showed up, but unfortunately this is still private property. But we've recorded it, and this is published now. And another site, Khirbet Mutraba-Sekin, unfortunately was largely bulldozed. We only have one stone from there and a tomb which seems similar to Qazone. So it's all in the context of this Nabataean type tombs. And a comment now about surveying. There's been a lot of aerial photography, which is excellent, very important. Here you have Feifa with thousands of tombs and structures being recorded. But unless you go on site and walk it, which archaeologists do, you don't always get the complete picture. Here we found some years ago some tombs which I think also are Nabataean tombs. Fortunately, now they're within an Islamic graveyard, so they're protected. But this was not recorded through aerial photography, as you can see. So you do need to be on the ground also. And you also need to do excavations. In fact, you need to do excavations. Oh, I think you also need to do excavations. The Department of Antiquities at the moment has been doing as much as they can, and they're digging. I've already shown you 2 or 3 sites they've excavated. Recently, they excavated a site at Qazone because there are going to be some water pools and dams put in here. And the Inspector of Antiquities, Mahoza Mazra, located a number of sites from, well, mostly Bronze Age. But what interests us tonight is also there were some tombs that he came across, and he called me over and he said, Dino, they're just like Khirbet Qazone, the tombs. And they are. Mud bricks here, sealed tight. He did this section, very nicely drew the section, exactly like Qazone. So at Qazone, which is south, it's almost on the Wadi Araba, there are more tombs similar to the ones, and there are more tombs that I'm not sure the department can deal with it because there's so many of them. But this is good evidence to show there's at least 3 or 4 sites now similar to Qazone. What did they find? A wooden coffin, preserved wood, some gold earrings similar to the ones that we found, Nabataean and Qazone, leather sandals like we found. So it seems to be pretty much similar. Now, the final part of the conservation project is the textiles. The British Museum has finished its involvement. We were able to get from the Technical School of Athens to get conservation help. This first textile was conserved and is now, here it is on display in Safi. And here it is being discussed before conservation. So here are Granger Taylor again discussing it with the conservators and studying it. It's been mounted and it's in Jordan and it's on display. There's also a display of the objects in the museum at the lowest place on earth, for those of you who haven't been there, and an excavation and an explanation about the Khirbet Qazone cemetery, as you can see here, with some of the tombstones we found. And some of the burials we found, particularly this one which they call a mummy, but it's not. It's just dry, desiccated. The anthropologist Rula Shafiq, from former Yarmouk University student who's now in university in Turkey, she came twice to study the bones and to help us lay them out. And even though some people might find this an issue, the local interest, and I think generally the interest has been great. As you can see here, local people and tourists visiting one of these wrapped bodies in textiles. There's been another body which has been found, and it's unwrapped, and it has, if you look at the details, the textiles, it has the tunic, the double clavi, and the gamma shape. So a typical Greco-Roman dress, which will help date this body. But finally, the textiles that were preserved, conserved, and mounted in the British Museum, I showed you a couple in the Safi Museum, but these are the ones at the Jordan Museum, including the one that was on the poster. So you can see them, and they're very typical: a tunic, mantle, scarf, and they represent, along with the ones that we've found in other museums, the best collection really in Jordan, certainly in this part of the world. And that brings us also to the discussion discussion about ancient clothing, which we try to address. This is another poster in the museum in the Lower Safi, talking about how clothing is not necessarily associated to any specific religion, but it was a style of the times. So whether whatever nationality you were, whether you were Nabataean or Herodian or Greek or Roman, you would probably be wearing similar type of clothing. Here you have a statue from Greece. Here you have from Egypt. This is again from the synagogue in Dura Europus, which shows ladies wearing similar. This is supposed to be the Virgin Mary from the Bible in Iraq, dressed in a similar kind of dress. And again, Fayum portraits here. So very important to understand the fashions and the styles of the time, and something which is also actually very important even to today. So Megan Perry, Professor Megan Perry, who is part of this our project, began studying the bones, and the human studies are another issue. But there's been a study begun on the human bones, and that will hopefully be completed sometime later in the year, and it will be incorporated in the publication. So again, the study of this is important, and Megan Perry is also on the committee of ACOR, so she's an important part of ACOR, and I'm happy that there will be some continued involvement with this study. And finally, what did Nabataeans look like? What do we know about Nabataeans? Well, what we do know is some of the coins. The coin evidence gives us some of the best views of the Nabataeans. This is a Nabataean coin, King Aretas IV and his wife Shekelat in the 1st century AD. These are the two. This is Sileus, which I've already mentioned, the romantic Sileus. These are the mummy portraits from Egypt, same period. These are all the same period. And you look at the faces, you know, and it could be somebody walking down the street in, you know, Amman. But perhaps most interesting is Zaki. Zaki here is from South Arabia, and he's depicted here in curly hair with a mustache, large eyes. I would say, and so does Glenn Bowersock, that he looks like an Arab. But they're dressed with tunics. Look at this. And the style of the faces, again, quoting other historians, is very much like the Greek style of portraying them. So if one is trying to understand what the Nabataeans looked like by the end of the Nabataean period, I think these are some of our best evidence. I also put a little head here, which maybe is a little bit shocking, but we have from the site human remains that we can also identify, and if one wants to do even DNA studies, which is I know controversial, we can begin to see what the Nabataean Arabs look like, who they were, perhaps where they came from. But certainly these portraits help us to not even to imagine, to know what the Nabataean people looked like. And with the objects I've shown you, I hope I've convinced you, and I hope we'll be able to convince the world that Jordan has these 3, 4, 5 sites in the Dead Sea area that are Nabataean and represent a very interesting part of Jordan's history and the Near Eastern history, and for that matter, world history. And with that, I will end. Thank you very much.